Imagine discovering that every detail of your current existence, from the small daily choices to the most transformative experiences, didn't happen by mere chance. Think about the curiosity that arises when you question whether, even before arriving in this world, your consciousness had already made fundamental decisions about who you would be, where you would be born, and what challenges you would face. This possibility may initially seem distant from any logic, but there are many spiritual perspectives that point to something greater at play, a kind of plan your soul laid out long before you took your first breath. The idea that our essence chose this path can spark both reflection and a sense of responsibility about everything we experience. Some call this deep learning, others see it as a carefully structured spiritual script guiding us toward what our soul yearns to develop. Regardless of beliefs, this view has sparked debates in many mystical, religious, and even lay circles seeking answers to their intense experiences. If we take a moment to observe everyday situations, like unexpected encounters or difficulties that arise out of the blue, we soon realize there are experiences that seem to stubbornly repeat in each person's life. Maybe you notice that some relationships carry a different energy, almost as if they were rehearsed in another realm before they happened. Other times, obstacles that appear at key moments end up shaping our character or opening doors to discoveries we never would have imagined. For those who believe in the continuity of the soul, these signs aren't mere coincidences, they would be reflections of purposes your higher consciousness had already outlined, keeping in mind the growth you needed to achieve. And from this perspective, the concept of death comes into play, not as a final destination, but as a passage that invites us to view earthly life as part of a greater cycle. Death, for many people, is still seen as something dark, the end of everything. However, in many spiritual traditions, it operates as a state transition or even as a liberation, allowing the soul to find a fresh start. It's not about closing the story, but about flipping the chapter in a narrative that is much longer than we might think. This viewpoint can be comforting when we experience loss. Instead of viewing the departed person as someone who vanished, we come to see them as a spirit who simply moved on to another form of existence. This opens up the idea that the bond with that person continues beyond the physical realm. In countless cultures, there are reports of signs, messages, and apparitions that indicate this ongoing connection. And if you enjoy content that unravels these mysteries deeply, it could be interesting to follow every topic that arises here to remain open to meaningful discoveries. As we dive into the idea that your soul chose certain paths before arriving in this realm, we must also address the concept of a much broader cycle, which some refer to as the 1,000-year cycle. Although this numerical value may vary depending on each tradition or line of thought, what truly matters is the notion that our existences repeat and chain together in intervals that go beyond what we can grasp with normal memory. It's as if, each time we return, we have the chance to rewrite certain stories, resolve unfinished business, or gain insights that weren't fully absorbed in a previous stage. With each reincarnation, we're confronted with new roles, new challenges, and, at the same time, we carry with us the remnants of experiences lived in previous passages. This would mean that our current life is not an isolated event, it's the result of a long chain of reincarnations, all interconnected, aimed at promoting our evolution. This process isn't mechanically determined. Some believe that, in each interval between one existence and another, the soul reviews everything that transpired, observes its achievements, and recognizes where there are still gaps. At this moment, it decides what experiences are necessary in the next earthly life. It would be like planning a study trip, choosing places and situations that provide the most important lessons. Some interpret this planning quite literally, claiming that even family relationships, environments, and the people who will cross our paths are largely predefined. All this, of course, takes into account the freedom each being has to accept or reject these growth opportunities. But, on a deeper level, it's like having a list of subjects you need to study to advance, although you can choose the form and speed with which you'll learn them. Within this view, death plays a crucial role. When one incarnation ends, the soul supposedly returns to its broader state of consciousness and can then assess clearly what worked and what still needs work. It's no wonder so many religious and esoteric traditions talk about judgments, life reviews, and even waiting places or intervals before the next reincarnation. All of this is part of a cyclical process that repeats over and over. So, instead of viewing death as a definitive tragedy, we can see it as crossing a necessary boundary, something that allows for fresh starts in other contexts and dimensions. This shift in how we perceive death significantly influences our approach to everyday life, as it gives us the sense that each step has a greater meaning than the ordinary eyes can see. When discussing a 1,000-year cycle, many wonder why that number. It's not just an exact mathematical calculation, but a symbolic representation of the longevity of the spiritual learning process. In some traditions, lengthy periods are mentioned during which the soul alternates between material and subtle realms, with the incarnation period being only a fraction of something much larger. In other schools of thought, this cycle is just a metaphor for something that can't even be limited by the counting of time we use on Earth. What's essential, however, is to understand that each life would be a piece of a much broader puzzle, in which the soul dedicates itself to refining its qualities, overcoming weaknesses, and grasping aspects of reality it still doesn't master. This continuity might explain why some people display extraordinary talents from childhood on, without ever having been formally trained. Or why we encounter children with a deep fear of water, fire, or heights, as if they carry memories of traumatic events that didn't occur in their current experience. It's as if there's an archive of memories that accompanies the soul in each transition, even if the majority remains dormant or is filtered by our conscious mind. And it's at this point that understanding reincarnation can shed light on our behaviors and inclinations, as not everything is explained solely by the environment we were born into or the influences we received after coming into the world. If we think about our daily lives, how many times do we meet people who seem to teach us valuable lessons or challenge us in very specific ways? Sometimes it's a coworker who awakens our patience, tolerance, and self-control. Other times, it's a loving partner who exposes our deepest insecurities and forces us to reconsider concepts we've held for a long time. These encounters might seem coincidental, but when we reflect from a spiritual perspective, it's possible to see a greater plan that orchestrates the joining of souls that complement or confront each other to generate mutual growth. Thus, even the most complex relationships gain a meaning beyond the superficial appearance of conflicts or fleeting affections. When we dive into the issue of karmic bonds, relationships take on an even more profound depth. Karma is, for many, just a term that refers to the law of cause and effect, but in a broader context, it also involves the legacy of past actions and their future reflections. It means that, throughout various existences, we create positive or negative connections with people, places, and situations. These connections continue to resonate, leading souls to reunite in different roles. Think about that childhood friend you've always had an inexplicable bond with. It could be that, in past lives, you played significant roles in each other's lives, cultivating an affinity that remains alive even in a new incarnation. The same applies to conflicting relationships. Sometimes, that persistent difficulty with someone might be an echo of something that was unresolved long ago, waiting for an opportunity to be clarified now. In everyday life, this phenomenon manifests in seemingly trivial situations, like a brief encounter with someone who crosses your path and, within minutes, leaves a strong impression. Some people are surprised to say, "I feel like I've known you for a long time." At that moment, it's often the soul recognizing something familiar in that other being, even if the rational mind tries to find explanations. These experiences don't occur to confuse us, but to demonstrate that nothing is as accidental as we might think and that every interaction can provide clues about our spiritual development. From this conception, many people seek to undergo regression therapy or specific meditations to try to access past life memories. They say this process can illuminate patterns we live today, helping us overcome limitations or understand certain inclinations. It's like opening an old photo album, not to get stuck in the past, but to better comprehend where certain tendencies came from and how to refine them. The idea is not to foster attachment to what happened but to use that information to move forward more consciously. Amid all this, the perspective on death transforms yet again. If we see life as a sequence of opportunities for evolution, the end of an incarnation is merely a chance to review our progress and, down the line, chart new steps. For many, this process of reincarnation and constant learning is the answer to the mystery of why we are here, experiencing challenges, joys, pains, and intense connections. It's believed that the main goal is not to accumulate material goods or status, but to expand consciousness, awaken empathy, and unconditional love. When we understand that today's suffering may have roots in an action from yesterday, or from another life, we stop blaming others and take greater responsibility for what happens. And when we open ourselves to this understanding, any experience, no matter how painful, can acquire a meaning of overcoming and inner refinement. In relationships, this becomes especially evident. Many people wonder why they seem to repeat the same type of romantic bond or face the same family conflicts. From a spiritual perspective, these circumstances might be reflections of unfinished lessons. If you find yourself repeating negative patterns, maybe it's time to investigate if there's something in your essence that's resonating at that frequency. And if we all can bring to the surface what's misaligned, we can break a cycle that would otherwise tend to perpetuate over several existences. This is where the transformative power of self-knowledge and spiritual awakening manifests, as what seems like a chronic problem can turn into a precious opportunity for growth. If we pause to reflect, we also notice how many people feel like, during certain phases of life, they receive a kind of push or invisible encouragement to reassess their choices. This might happen in personal crises, serious illnesses, emotional breakups, or financial losses. Our first reaction is to see this as bad luck or punishment, but from a reincarnationist perspective, these challenges might be what our soul chose to face to hasten its own transformation. It's something that escapes the idea of punishment. Instead, it's an invitation to open our eyes and realize what's at stake. When suffering knocks on our door, it shakes us out of our comfort zones. It's not a gesture of cruelty from the universe, but rather the way to create the necessary pressure for us to decide to change. Some people ask, but why would the soul choose suffering? From a spiritual perspective, discomfort often serves as a major driver of evolution. When everything is easy, there's little motivation to dive into the mysteries of life and rethink habits that have become automatic. Suffering, when approached wisely, can bring humility and compassion, as well as reveal hidden talents. Many people share that their most turbulent times were actually when they grew the most, discovering virtues like courage, resilience, and faith. Seen this way, difficulties aren't enemies, but rather tools for sculpting that our soul, with all its wisdom, placed on our path to empower us. It's clear, then, that death, life, and this entire cyclical process intertwine in a choreography that tends towards spiritual maturity. We don't need to accept everything blindly. Many people choose to stay skeptical, and that's perfectly valid. However, for those who open themselves to this perspective, existence takes on a new hue. There's more purpose in how we handle each situation, more care in how we treat others, and more awareness of the signs that pop up here and there. It's like realizing that coincidences aren't as random as they seem, and that each individual plays a bigger role than the ego usually admits. It's within this context that various spiritual dimensions, mentioned in different schools of thought, fit in. There's talk of higher vibrational dimensions where the soul can regain a true sense of unity with everything. The earth, in this sense, would be a kind of school where lessons are practical and intense, because contact with matter and dense emotions allows us to truly experience what we can only intuit in other realms. If the higher dimensions are our true home, then death is nothing but a temporary return to that place of origin. What makes this even more relevant is understanding that each time we go back home, we come back stronger and more aware, ready to pick up our learning from where we left off in a new cycle. Within this grand tapestry, karmic relationships arise not as traps but as opportunities to test and refine values like patience, forgiveness, reciprocity, and compassion. You may have noticed that the more you try to escape certain patterns, the more they show up, almost as if they're saying, "You still haven't learned the lesson." Repetition is a teaching tool of the universe. So, the quicker we recognize what needs to change, the less life has to insist on the same tests. Look at how this applies to everyday situations, like the chaotic traffic that sparks irritation or the recurring arguments with someone close. Could it be that we're facing a mirror reflecting what's inside us, begging for a reassessment? Once you realize that these dynamics will repeat, whether in this life or another, many people start looking at themselves in a different light. Instead of blaming fate, society, or family, we begin to seek solutions that involve a deep inner dive, without using the word journey, identifying areas that need healing or conscious change. This work isn't instant, nor is it confined to just one lifetime. Yet, every step taken brings relief. The soul feels it's fulfilling its greater purpose, and because of that, many aspects of life start to flow more harmoniously. In the end, all these reflections lead us to a pivotal shift that deeply alters how we view life and death. Knowing, or at least considering, that our time here is part of a larger cycle that began before our birth can give us strength and courage to face the unpredictable waves that arise. Instead of feeling like victims of uncontrollable circumstances, we realize we're here by choice and that every situation, good or bad, can serve as a springboard to elevate us to a more complete state of awareness. This perspective provides a broad meaning to what some people call fate, while also inviting us to take the reins of our own experience. And perhaps the most important question is, how do we apply this information in our daily lives? Knowing that the soul chose this life isn't just a detail, it's an encouragement to observe every emotion, every relationship, and every challenge as part of a bigger plan. Instead of feeling trapped by circumstances, you become the author of your own development. The pursuit of self-knowledge becomes a priority because, in doing so, it's possible to uncover the triggers that cause you to repeat certain mistakes, starting to break the cycles that bring discomfort. It may seem complex, but often it's simply about paying attention to the small signs life offers. People or situations that repeat, feelings that explode without explanation, recurring dreams pointing to unfinished themes, all of this is a way for the universe, or your own soul, to communicate that it's time to take a different step. If each existence is a chance to learn and, above all, to evolve, then life ceases to be merely a string of random events. Each meeting, each loss, each joy forms a carefully orchestrated mosaic for the spirit to awaken to something deeper. At the end of it all, there's no definitive conclusion because the soul remains in motion, always ready to experience other facets of reality, whether in this realm or another. And it's precisely at this point that the most powerful reflection emerges. Are you, at this moment, making the most of the opportunities life offers? Or are you getting carried away by the same choices that delay necessary changes? Each of us carries the possibility of transforming our path by recognizing that nothing is by chance. So, when the time comes to cross the portal of death, instead of fear, perhaps you'll feel relief knowing you've completed another part of a cycle that doesn't end here. After all, if death is a new beginning, then every ending can be viewed as a celebration of continuity. The lingering feeling is that waking up to these themes isn't an ending, but a birth of possibilities. If all of this resonates with you, it might be worthwhile to keep following our reflections and share yours as well, because every experience enriches the collective understanding of this immensely complex topic. What you live today might be a fundamental link for someone else going through something similar. By sharing your point of view, you also become part of a vast network of exchanges that help strengthen the understanding of the purpose of our interconnected existences. To wrap up this line of thought in a way that encourages us to keep reflecting, it's good to remember that everything we've discussed here doesn't require you to change your beliefs immediately. What matters most is keeping an open mind and a receptive heart to the possibility that there is, indeed, meaning in every twist and turn along the path. By bringing this awareness into your daily life, you might feel a subtle call to reconsider your actions, value the connections you make, and even reassess how you view painful events. No one is here laying down absolute rules, we're just raising questions that can illuminate a new way of living and dying, understanding that everything is part of a greater story, chosen by our own essence. If this conversation resonated with you and brought some kind of insight, it might be interesting to stay in touch with this space where reflections like this arise frequently. It's a natural movement for those touched by these subjects to seek deeper connections. Without any formalities, the invitation is there for you to connect and also record your experience, for your personal perspective can become a valuable piece of this mosaic. And if at any point you feel the urge to continue exploring these questions, know that there's so much to discover about how the soul prepares, learns, and returns, time and time again, in the quest for wisdom that never runs dry. With that, I conclude this reflection without a definitive endpoint, because the soul's journey has no final destination. Just a reminder that each choice, each meeting, and each farewell makes up a continuous stream of evolution. If you want to keep following this type of content and feel it makes a difference, there's always a space here where you can feel free to exchange ideas and maybe even share your own experience in the comments. It's a way to further expand this dialogue and help others find the answers they might be looking for. And, of course, if you find it useful, there's always the option to follow discreetly, so you won't miss future insights that may also inspire your inner growth.